Oi, oi, it's your boy, professional gaming journalist Jack Slack. I'm coming off a fresh 20-minute test of the old Undisputed and testing whether the theory that bad fight night is better than no fight night holds true. It was all right. wasn't blown away. Feels worse than Fight Night Champion. And, it's early access at the moment, but just some of the things just make no sense. Spending money licensing Kenny Bayless and his image instead of just making the game better. Getting Todd Grisham to do commentary. That's how you know the people who were putting this game together knew nothing about combat sports, because Todd Grisham is fucking dreadful. And there isn't a combat sport on earth where people don't shit on him. Todd Grisham got the UFC gig. They cut to Sakuraba in the audience. He's like, that's a happy-looking Japanese man. He couldn't even read his name off the auto cue. Fucking legend of the sport. But they got Todd Grisham on commentary, and he's also been like the face of this in fundraising and shit, and in the advert. And what they've done with the commentary is there's a way to do it which is like, it sounds a bit tacky, and it breaks your immersion a little bit. If you go, that round clearly scored for the red corner, or the fighter from the red corner is tearing him up with bodywork or whatever. But nothing, because you can't put everyone's names in, especially as they're licensing new people all the time. But the commentary in Undisputed is just like nonsense. It's just out there to make noise. The man is constantly saying at the end of the round, the judges are going to have a horrible time scoring that one. And then when you go back to your corner, Todd Grisham is saying, oh, that was a massacre. Give that man a 10-8. And you just get no indication. It's just, really tedious having to listen to it. Makes you realise that the commentary on the UFC games, while it does get annoying after a while, it's pretty decently put together. And, they record that while Anik is flying around the world doing a different fight night every week, or at least to the Apex every week. Whereas Todd Grisham, not working, doesn't do anything. I think he might still do Glory. But there's not an awful lot of demand for Todd Grisham around the globe. Can't remember who it was, but someone got hurt in a fight and he goes, get out of there, and their name, it was just, he's a cringe, he's the king of cringe, more so than Henry Cejudo. Anyway, I'll talk about this because we've had a fight night on Saturday that was Holly Holm versus Mayra Bueno Silva. Really just lazily put together card. And luckily, it delivered on the memes, even if it didn't deliver on great fights. Let's go straight off the top. Very happy to see Holly Holm lose, particularly while trying to cage hump. Because she's got the weirdest career path, because she was like a super successful boxer without having a boxing coach. If you ever need to know anything about women's boxing, which is going through a bit of a rebirth at the moment, actually, with people like Katie Taylor and Clarissa Shields. But if you ever need to know anything about women's boxing, or when Holly Holm was fighting, she was an 8-time world champion or whatever, with a kickboxing coach / MMA coach in her corner. And she did it by those running combinations, those drive-by sprints of left straight, right uppercut, left straight, over and over again. If you watch her fights, it ain't boxing. It's not the stuff you see on televised fights in men's boxing, is all I'm saying. But she did move well, and she had tremendous conditioning, and she was always a great athlete, which is why when she came over to MMA, she found out that she was a hoss in the clinch. And basically, she could just move around anyone in the division. It was it was a pleasant surprise in the Cyborg fight, because Cyborg was counterpunching her and, turning her head around with these punches. And Holly Holm would get her into the clinch and push her to the fence and just sort of hold her and knee her. And it wasn't part of Holly Holm's game plan. But you were watching her going, damn, Holly Holm, you're out-muscling Cyborg Santos. That's pretty impressive. Maybe you could use that in some way. Unfortunately, she then decided that she was just going to cage hump for the rest of her career. So every Holly Holm fight is a lot of ish out in the open at nothing, and then some holding against the fence while landing knees. Plug in your own misogynist comments about her butt cheeks poking out of her shorts once she's done it a few times, but it gets hard to watch. I appreciate her as an athlete. She's very impressive, particularly as she's 41, which is insane that she's still going, and lean as ever and still has tremendous cardio. But she chooses to fight in a really boring way, and they keep putting her in headliners. So those two things together make me mad whenever I see her. Bueno Silva, however, I was going to do something about this fight on a boycast. I wrote the Dricus du Plessis versus Rob Whittaker breakdown this week. Go check it out if you want to read that for the Patreon boys. But I didn't do a boy cast. I was getting it together, and then I was just like, I do not give a shit about this card. Or I was having a very hard time giving a shit about this card. But I was watching Bueno Silva's fights, and I did like a couple of things she was doing. She presses people to the fence. She hits the body very early and often. And those are two good things, particularly against someone like Holly Holm. And I was very impressed that she was pressing Holly Holm to the fence. Cutting her off with the right round kick to the body. Making sure that Holly could only go in one direction. Threatening the left hook when she went in that direction. Got her towards the fence. Problem was that Holly Holm would then duck into her chest and then turn her around. Which worked for one round. And in the second round, Holly Holm did it, and Bueno Silva grabbed a ninja choke. Now, the ninja choke, I pissed off some people online by saying this, but it only works. It doesn't only work, but I joked that it only works when the other guy's completely committed to cage humping. Because the times that you see it work typically are when people are so determined to be pressing into the fence that they just sort of leave their head out there on top of your bicep, their neck draped over the crook of your bicep. And that's when you grab up. I'm not talking about like a power guillotine where you grab a guillotine and then you convert it into a guillotine. You convert it into a figure four grip. I'm talking about when their head is resting on your arm as they're bent over in the upright position, and then you just snap it up around their head. You're driving in for a takedown and you've draped yourself across their bicep. That's the ninja choke that I'm talking about. And man, it works here a treat, because Holly Holm was like, yep, got her to the fence, just need to keep pressing my weight in. And she left her neck out there, and Mayra Bueno Silva snapped it up. Is she all finishes? She's got a lot of finishes. Oh no, she won 2 decisions. But funnily enough, she submitted a last with a ninja choke back on the Contender Series. She's got a couple of losses in the UFC, Marina Moros, which is not one that holds up particularly well, and Manon Fiorot, who everyone's sort of hot on, but who the fuck is... Someone just signed... It was Rose Namajunas is going to fight Manon Fiorot. What a weird fight to put together. Massive flyweight versus strawweight former champion. So yeah, sadly, no retirement announced. So there's the chance of another Holly Holm headliner in 2024. But good for Bueno Silva. She was pretty entertaining before, and now she's actually finished like a very tedious top competitor. Does sort of throw a spanner in the works of the suspected coronation that was going to happen. People thought that belt would just be Holly Holm's to take now. So what else went on this card? Lots of meme stuff. Jack Della Maddalena versus Basil Hafez is probably the most important fight that happened on this. I mean, they signed this at short notice, and they immediately were saying we're going to rocket it up the card. Of course, they couldn't put it in the main event because that's got to be a 5-rounder. But it was immediately slightly, more interesting than most of the stuff on this card. In fact, everything on this card. And I joked, he's fighting a motherfucker called Basil. Basil is not a scary name, but this lad came in and he fought his arse off. Wasn't the most technical guy in the world. Clearly just wanted the takedowns, but when he was on the feet and he was stuck there, he just swung for the fences, and he gave a very good account of himself, and honestly, could have won. People are debating the scorecards and so on, but, the first round, this is the thing. Shout out Jack Della Maddalena, because I know he's a listener/reader, but I think he probably knows that, like, some of his decision-making in this fight really could have cost him. I mean, it didn't end up costing him, but certainly his coaches were mad about it. There's sometimes, like, round 1, I'm fine with him getting bowled off his feet because he met this guy. The guy had really good double leg. Bit of a surprise. Della Maddalena's on his back. Scrambles up well. It's just the problem. This is the thing about Jack Della Maddalena. If you've seen him against, Angalusa or whoever it was on the Contender Series, he scrambles pretty well. It's just that scrambling up from the bottom takes time, and that's time that you're losing and not landing your punches, especially if you're someone who does great work with attrition striking to the body. That's time that you're not hitting them in the body. So when in the second round, he's sprawling out on a shot, he ends up in the front headlock, he goes hand in the back of the head, going for the quarter Nelson to turn him over, and Basil has like one arm draped on the single leg. And JDM, I mean, he could have fought that, and it would have been effort, to fight against it, but he went for the guillotine. He sat down on the guillotine, and there were loads of instances where he sat down on the guillotine in this fight, but it was that one in the second round where he basically, I mean, on a lot of people's scorecards, he threw that second round by jumping on the guillotine. We always joke about Dustin Poirier's philosophy of don't be silly, jump the gilly. I don't think he's ever successfully guillotined anyone. So you saw when JDM got stuck on the bottom, he did good things, like he cleared the cross-facing hand, turned in, stood up, used that, what's called false half or turtle hook that Craig Jones is always on about nowadays. It's a Eduardo Teles thing from back in the day. If you go watch Alec Balding, a great jiu-jitsu player, just put out a video on Eduardo Teles, the Turtle Master. So yeah, that's a cool little thing he was doing, getting back up to the feet, whipping the underhook through, returning to the standing 50-50. But, I think he probably, he didn't shoot himself in the foot here, but I think he did almost shoot himself in the foot by trying to get a finish in what was going to, had the guillotine worked any of those times, it would have been a nice quick way. But he came close to the finish in the third round by putting a beating on Basil with body shots and so on. But that's the trap of being in a short notice fight against a late replacement who is not regarded or known. We always talk about Beneil Dariush versus Alexander Hernandez or Lando Venata versus Tony Ferguson in the height of his powers. These guys who come in, and if they're decently skilled, which they probably are, they're firstly a bit of an unknown, so you don't have an awful lot of time or footage to work from. And secondly, the expectation is that you murder them. If you don't, people question whether you were good in the first place, and then you can walk yourself into this trap where, in trying to finish them, you fight worse. Or walk right into their skills. A couple of things I liked in this one. I mean, Basil's float over whenever JDM sat down on the guillotine, beautiful, just cartwheeled across to the other side. JDM, when he was orthodox, well, actually Basil was switching too, which is another good thing to do against a guy who switch hits, and I think probably made it a little bit more difficult for JDM as well. If you, I think his corner were asking more for the orthodox, but if you switch hit with someone who switch hits, they're used to working against one stance, so they know what they're going to throw. If you start switching with them, and then sometimes you don't, and sometimes you do, their switch doesn't always lead them where they think they're going to be. Because we're talking about an open guard, closed guard scenario, or open stance, closed stance scenario switch, rather than, that's more important than which side you've got forward. But when they were in the open stance, and I think Della Maddalena was orthodox, so Basil was southpaw, Della Maddalena would square his hips and shoulders and throw a pokey right straight, and then dip. So it was basically the jab and dip, but done with the rear hand. And what would happen was Basil would throw back and then miss, and Della Maddalena would try and hit him in the body or the head with a nice counter combination. Really lovely. And I saw Taito Gunji do that in K1 today as I'm recording this. Really nice way to use the jab and dip if you're in a southpaw versus orthodox matchup, and particularly if your lead hand is occupied in fighting. Oh, and there was that cool sort of arm drag to wrist hold that Della Maddalena did when, in the third round, Basil was trying to push through on a double leg, grabbing his shorts. The ref goes, let go of the shorts. Basil lets go of the shorts. Della Maddalena arm drags him, holds his wrist, and hits him 3 times in the chin with his free hand. So not a bad fight, and good for Basil. I don't it's one of those things where I think he's probably performed above his potential. Kind of like Lando Venata, never reached those same levels that we hoped for him. Or, again, Alexander Hernandez. But he does deserve some, he deserves an easier fight than Jack Della Maddalena in the UFC, and he deserves a payday of some kind. And for JDM, everyone is now going to be like, well, Sean Brady would have beaten him. And I don't rate Sean Brady much, to be honest, but the one thing he can do is grapple his arse off. But this one, I do think it was mainly decisions. After that first round, it was trying to jump on guillotines and things. Or even in the third round, jumped on his back, tried to finish him with a rear naked choke. I get that you're a rounded fighter, but if that's been slowing you down, because he ended up on the bottom of that, if that's been slowing you down, getting into grappling exchanges, just have him stand up again and keep hitting his body like you were, But this is all stuff that he's going to be hearing from his coaches, I'm sure, and, if you watched it, you can probably appreciate that it was bad decision-making more than his being overrated as a fighter. That's the important fight done. What else is left on this card? Francisco Prado versus Otman Azaitar was good fun. Azaitar, no wins, going back to his incident at the Fight Island, where he snuck in a bag of suspicious contents, cut their wristbands off and climbed up the balcony or whatever it was. Not shady at all. But he got murked last time round. This time he comes out. I think Prado had a really good read on him, because actually this links in with something that Superlek was doing this weekend as well. But Otman Azaitar, firstly, Prado is backing him up and kicking him and bullying him a bit. But Omidazita will come off the fence with a left hook to the body, which is obviously a great punch, can really hurt people, can really stop them from coming in on you. We talked in my last article on 3 strikers you should be watching. I talked about Ryusei using the left hook to break his opponent's momentum coming forward. He uses a left hook to the body and then starts fighting on offense off that. He turns them around. Because the left hook to the body has the nice effect of, one, sort of threatening to win someone or actually winning them, but also being like, keep your elbows at home. And how are you going to punch if your elbows are at home? But Prado had done his research because he was stepping in with a right elbow every time he thought that Azaitar was squaring up to throw the left hook to the body. Obviously, to throw the left hook to the body, you've got to get close and you've got to drop your hands. Or drop your left hand, which is what's going to be preventing you from getting elbowed in the head. So he was doing real damage with that, and then the sort of fight-ending sequence was he's like slapped the inside of Azaitar's leg and then spun into a back fist or back elbow that hurt him. So that was really cool. Yeah, eyes on Prado, or Prado, whatever he is. He's cool. And it sort of links in with Superlek this weekend. He was fighting some lad called Tagir Kalilov. And Kalilov, someone sent me afterwards, had won a couple of big fights with big uppercuts, big right uppercuts. He jabs in and he throws his uppercut. Probably level changes and comes up with it. And Superlek, the moment that this guy moved in to throw the right uppercut, he just poked his left elbow straight into his eye and cut him open immediately. And then the rest of the fight was Superlek just elbowing the shit out of this guy until he got a stoppage in the second round. But that counter was so slick. It looks like nothing, because it looks like the guy's going for the uppercut and then he just realises that the elbow's already in his face and he goes, oh. And then you realise that he's been cut open by it. Jun-Young Park versus Duraev. Duraev actually looking confident on the feet. I've seen him on the feet look absolutely terrible in the past. But he looked like he was willing to have a tear up, and he did. And then eventually he got tired, and the Iron Turtle got on his back and choked him. Good for the Iron Turtle. I quite enjoy. He's had a couple of fights where I've seen the other guy he's fighting and gone, oh, for fuck's sake, I don't want to watch was it Devin Clark fight? I don't want to watch an Albert Duraev fight. Oh no, it was Eric Anders, not Devin Clark. But yes, he's on a 7-1 run, with the one loss being to Robocop in the third round. Give this man a ranked opponent. There's fuck all going on at middleweight aside from Dricus du Plessis. Norma Dumont boxed up some lass in her usual not getting the finish sort of way, but she did hurt her in the first second of the fight, and Chelsea Chandler sprinted in the opposite direction. And I think it was that Superlek fight. The guy, they called the fight off because the guy was running in the opposite direction. It is a foul in boxing and kickboxing to turn your back on the guy, and it's except for in kickboxing and Muay Thai when you're throwing a spinning technique, you can turn your back very briefly. But if you turn and run from the opponent, that gets you disqualified in a lot of sports. Not in MMA though. So she did carry on to the decision. So yeah, how bad could it have been? Nazim Sadikov survived a round against Terence McKinney, who was just all over him on his back trying to choke him for the whole of the first round. And then he got on Terence McKinney's back and choked him in like a minute in the second round. And Terence McKinney, the first time I saw it, I was like, is he not resisting at all? Did he just decide when the guy got on his back, he was like, well, I'll let him choke me because I can always fight again in 2 months. But when I saw it again, he gets his arm caught up his back. He's trying to turn his back, and his hand gets caught across his back. So as Sadikov moves onto his back to try and choke him, the arm gets trapped between Sadikov's chest and McKinney's back, and it becomes sort of a police arm lock. So he was kind of fucked. He couldn't really do anything. I mean, he's not going to, unless you're Shinya Aoki and you put both hands on it, you're not going to break the arm doing that. But it does mean that your arm's completely out of action trying to defend the choke. And basically all the high percentage choke finishes in grappling nowadays are when you can get two hands working against one. Anything else interesting on this card? There was that last broke her arm, which was a weird one because obviously I subscribe to a lot of different martial arts subreddits, but the judo subreddit is all like, this is why you never post on anything. It's like, have you ever watched wrestling? Have you ever watched Iran, their team in the Olympics or whatever? Their game is to grab an underhook, the other guy tries to throw them by the whizzer, Uchimata style, and they put a hand on the floor and then just drop into what's called the dogfight in jiu-jitsu, but just sort of a scramble to complete the single leg. And they do it by posting while the opponent's trying to throw them. And they succeed almost every time. So it's a weird one. People are just like, don't post. And this wasn't even a big amplitude throw. This was just a guy The girl dived really low on her leg, got a low single, and Nunes was falling over. Reached out, elbow slipped the wrong way, and it dislocated, and she screamed for a while afterwards, which was very uncomfortable. But sometimes it just happens. This was not a big throw. This was not a big fall. They always say don't post straight armed. You should always have a little bit of slack in your arm. You should always have a bit of bend in your arm. But I think this was just unfortunate. I mean, it happened to Shogun against Mark Coleman. So that card was shite. Let's move on. One had a fairly decent card on. The main thing that happened, aside from Superleg beating up Kalilov in the main event, Gary Tonin versus Shamil Gasanov. Another Sambo guy gets his leg destroyed. Just what? This was an MMA match, not a grappling match, which is their standard stock and trade. One love getting like a Sambo world champion and putting them in against someone who is actually really good at submission grappling. And then the Sambo world champion doesn't know what heel hooks are, so they just get murked. But this was an interesting one because Gary Tonin came out, shot a takedown almost immediately, tried to sit to half guard because the guy was a bit tougher to take down than he looked. And the guy started, he hopped past his guard immediately and started kneeing him in the head. And Gary Tonin basically had to try and fight back from being front headlocked and kneed in the head. Lots. There was a really nice little sort of faked dump from the front headlock to get behind Gasanov. The end happened when, in the second round, Gary Tonin is really struggling to get anything going on Gasanov. Gasanov locks his hands and throws Tonin by so that he's behind Tonin on the feet with a body lock. And Tonin does his Victor roll, his famous move, rolls between his legs, and lands in a knee bar, a lat knee bar underneath his armpit. And Gasanov looks at him for a minute, and Rich Franklin starts saying, he's not got the right angle, that'll never work. And then Gasanov basically just goes, yeah, okay, break my leg. And Tonin goes, okay, I will. And breaks his leg. And Gasanov screams, and that's the submission. But yeah, this is a thing, just dudes sitting in leg locks, not really knowing how they're going to get out, but hoping that when the other guy puts it on, it just doesn't work. Which is a fair strategy against people who are going to, diving after Achilles locks and things like that. But Gary Tonin knows what he's doing on legs. He's one of the few guys who made it famous, to be honest. But it's well worth checking out just for the Victor roll. And they didn't show a single other angle of the Victor roll, which was so cool. But, I'm always talking about it because Mateusz Gamrot is always trying it. And Gary Tonin did it against Mateusz Gamrot in ADCC, which is why Mateusz Gamrot probably tries it all the time. So not a great weekend of fights. However, there was a K1 event on today, which is happening as I'm talking, because obviously Japan, so things are on in the afternoon for me. Which had a lot of foreigners getting beaten up by Japanese champions, but it also had a pretty good main event between Hiromi Wajima and Jordan Piqueur. And Yuki Yosa was on the card, stopping someone with a triangle kick to the midsection, toes first. Absolutely delicious. Go watch that. There's clips of it all over Twitter. And maybe I'll write something about that in the week. It was a pretty big card. There were 40 fights on it, so there's lots to talk about. But in the meantime, we've got stuff to get to work on for next weekend. We've got the UFC's coming to London, which is a fairly sort of middling card. But the return of Tom Aspinall is always exciting. And there's a couple of other things on that are interesting. There's a small Crush card, kickboxing-wise. There's Bellator versus Ryzen 2, which has some fun fights on. And there's also Bud Crawford versus Errol Spence, which I think I'll probably spend most of the week writing an article about or something like that, because that's the big one, fellas. That's the one that's been in the works for a long time. So I will catch you later in the week. If you want to get in on all my extra stuff, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Some girl remembering to twerk in her post-fight interview once every 3 years and people losing their minds. Bless.